All right, so first and foremost, just want to make sure that everyone out there can hear the sound of my voice because I have been talking and hopefully you've been listening. Can you just say hello in the chat? Use the chat pane to say hello if you can hear the sound of my voice. Excellent, and hello back to everybody. So I want to thank everybody for joining us today and wish everyone good day. Thank you for joining today's Client Enrichment Series presentation. Our topic today is RWA policy, including highlights of the National Policy Manual. So my name is Eric Fulton. I'm the National Program Manager for Customer Outreach and Communication at GSA headquarters in Washington, D.C. More importantly, I am your host for today's edition of the Client Enrichment Series. As I just mentioned, and hopefully you clicked through before we begin, I do want to let everyone know that we are recording today's session. You should have clicked through on the pop-up window when that happened. Why do we do this? Well, we're recording the session today because we have a YouTube channel. We post archived Client Enrichment Series videos on this channel. You can access more than 30, I think up to 32 or 33 at this point, past sessions anytime, day or night. There is a link to our YouTube channel at the end of today's slide deck, so we encourage you to check that out. For those of you who need a prompt, maybe you're following by phone, we are now on the second slide. I want to sorry there, I hit the wrong button. So we are on the presenter slide, and I want to introduce everybody to our presenters today. We have two presenters joining us today from our Reimbursable Services Department. The first is Jeff Franz. He is a program analyst, and in this role, Jeff works to improve the policy, process, outreach, and systems components of our Reimbursable Services program. Jeff is a New Jersey native. He attended Bucknell University, where he studied economics and German, and he recently completed a master's in international commerce and policy at George Mason University. If you've ever attended any of our recurring e-RETA training sessions, you're likely familiar with Jeff and his role with the application and the RWA program. So our second speaker today is John Palmer. John is National Program Manager and the RWA Policy Lead for GSA's Project Delivery Excellence Division. John oversees the management, guidance, and communication of RWA policy and also serves as a National Program Manager for the Small Project Delivery Program. Prior to joining PDE in 2019, John spent 17 years with GSA Region 2 in Project Delivery and Management, and prior to his GSA career, John spent 14 years in the military and the private sector. John earned his bachelor's degree in civil engineering from the United States Military Academy at West Point. All right, so today we are discussing RWA policy and highlights of our National Policy Manual. To give you an idea of the scope of our RWA program, GSA accepts approximately 15,000 RWAs each year at a value in excess of $2 billion on behalf of 330 federal agencies and bureaus. And while this presentation is focused on RWA policy, we do want to remind all of you that in order to submit a work request or RWA information to us here at GSA, you must use our e-RETA application and the digital signature feature. We do host e-RETA training sessions regularly. We have one coming up, I believe, next month, and you can find the full schedule up online at the URL listed on your screen. That's www.gsa.gov/CES. www.gsa.gov/eRETA. That is where we have that information. So Jeff and John are going to cover the full agenda here momentarily, but over the course of the next 90 minutes, I do want to pull out a couple of highlights. We are going to discuss, obviously, Reimbursable Services Program, eRETA and RWAs, the RWA National Policy Manual, and of course, we will leave time for your questions throughout and at the end. So before I turn things on over to our presenters today, I do want to go over just a few housekeeping instructions. We've automatically muted your audio, and that helps us preserve the sound quality for the presentation. If you are new to using Zoom for Government, well, welcome. We've found Zoom for Government a great platform to use. It's pretty intuitive and user-friendly, and particularly if you're familiar with just the generic Zoom platform. And honestly, after the past 10 months, I'd suggest that most of us are very familiar with the Zoom platform. But if you're not, what you can do, you can customize the various pods as you see fit. You'll see we have a Q&A pod and a chat pod. I'm going to discuss those momentarily. You can also minimize or maximize the screen that we're sharing so you can get a better look at the slides today. So we do want to make this an interactive presentation. We do have subject matter experts on hand who are ready to take your questions related to RWA policy. However, there are two pods to take note of. There is a chat pod and a Q&A pod. And these are two distinct different things, and I just want to let you know how to use each of them. The chat pod, where you said hello to me just a few minutes ago, that's where our CES team members will be, and they're going to help you with any administrative issues that you might be having if you're having connectivity or audio issues. They're also going to post helpful links to either our YouTube channel or other resources maybe that we mentioned during the course of the presentation. If you have a question regarding RWA policy for one of our subject matter experts, please use the Q&A area. This is where the couple of RWA policy experts that we have behind the scenes are hanging out, and they are ready to take your questions as they come in. We may, if something requires further explanation, ask some questions of our panelists over the course of the presentation today. But regardless, what we're going to do is take all of the questions you ask, all of the answers we provide, and if we don't get to some of your questions, we're going to take those as well, turn that into a formal FAQ document. We're going to make that available to you after today's session, after we review, and post it onto our website, both at the CES website and the RWA website, which is www.gsa.gov/RWA. So, having said all of that preamble, we are going to skip ahead to the next slide for those of you who are following along, and this is a poll question time. We want to get to know everybody a little bit better today. And so we have a poll question coming on the screen here just momentarily. And we want to know, I'm going to read the poll questions out. We understand that if you're dialing in, obviously you can't see what's on the screen. And we've had some participants say that they can't read the screen. So I'm going to read it out to you. And if you can't see the poll, you can put your answer right there in the chat. We want to know which of the following roles best describes your involvement with the RWA program, and you can select more than one here. You can choose from project manager, you can choose contracting officer, you can do building property portfolio manager, you can do budget or financial manager, we have funding certifying official, or the all-encompassing other. Please register your responses there on the screen. If you can't see the poll for excuse me, one reason or another, you can always throw your response right there in the chat. We are going to record these, and in just a moment, what we're going to do is broadcast the results. We'll give everyone a moment or two more. And the envelope, please. Here we go. So it looks as though we have quite a mix of people here coming in. We have about a third of our audience who identify as project managers, 17% as contracting officers. We have 27% who are some sort of building property portfolio manager. And we have 6% who are in budget or finance. We have another 3% who are just fund certifying officials, and 37% who are other. Probably a lot more than that because we all have those other duties as assigned. So what we are going to do is clear that poll question out. We have one more poll question to help us get to know you a little bit better before we start our presentation in earnest today. And that one's going to come on the screen here, and this is about eReader. As I said earlier, eReader and RWAs are tied hand in hand. So we want to know, what access do you currently have in eReader? Do you have data? Are you a data entry user? Are you a read-only user? Or do you not have any eReader access at all and you don't have a user ID? We just want to know, sort of gauge the pulse of the room here. We will wait a couple more seconds. I see a couple people throwing some responses in the chat here, I think. Excellent. All right, let's see what the survey says. All right, well, we have another great mix, but it looks like we have 60% of the folks here who are data entry users. Those are folks who can do all sorts of things with eReader. You can submit and edit information. We have read-only users comprise 15% of our audience, but a quarter, 25%, don't have an eReader user ID. So that is quite the the mix of people, I'll put in a plug for something I'm going to say at the end. We do have eReader training sessions coming up in the near future for those of you who don't have an eReader user ID, but over the course of this session realize, oh geez, I better get an eReader user ID. So we are going to pull that poll question off. And at this time, I am going to step aside. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our first of our two presenters today, and that is Jeff Franz. So Jeff, take it away. The floor is yours.
Awesome. Thanks, Eric. And thanks, everyone, for answering the poll questions. Those just give us kind of a good idea of, who's here, different roles, eReader access, like Eric said. We do have tailored training towards eReader. I'm going to talk about it a little bit here, as you can see from the topics here. But just keep in mind that, if you need more work on how to use our system, that sort of thing, that training is available to you in the future. So with that said, I'm going to tee off the training with kind of explaining the difference between RWA work requests versus RWAs, kind of get into the work request RWA workflow, if you will, and then how eReader plays a huge part in that. Like Eric said, they are hand in hand, eReader and RWAs. After that, I think we'll have another poll question. There's going to be a couple throughout, so just try to pay attention as best you can, because we'll have a couple poll questions, quiz questions, if you will, here and there. So again, just stay tuned, and then so John will get into the kind of the policy section, the meat of the training, if you will, talk through some resources, and then we can have an open question and answer at the end as needed. So with that, I'm going to get into kind of the difference between work requests and RWAs here. And it sounds like or it looks like my audio is crackling a little bit. Hopefully it's still good enough to hear. So I'm just going to keep going, but my team just, of course, let me know if it's not clear. So work requests and RWAs, what is the difference? We often get the question, I don't understand what the difference is between an RWA work request and a full-blown or accepted RWA, if you will, right? So the difference is that a work request is an identification of a need for a project or a service. And before eReader, before our external RWA entry and tracking application, you or your agency, you might have submitted a work request, via an email. You might have said, hey, GSA, I have a need for project or service in this space. You might have sent that as an email. You might have called someone up. You might have went in person to your GSA building manager to let them know, right? That's essentially what a work request was. That's what it still is. The difference now is that you're sending that work request via eReader, via our system, right? So what does an RWA work request do? It initiates that requirements development process, right? So developing a project scope, schedules, estimates, what have you, to eventually become an accepted RWA, right? So as an eReader user, you would go in the system, you would create and submit an RWA work request, which effectively tells GSA that you have a need for that project or service. So it's not a full-blown RWA yet, but the nice thing, and I'll kind of walk through this in our workflow in the next slide, is that work request builds into an RWA, and that all happens in the same system. So it's not like you send a work request via eReader, and then you go into some other system to send your full-blown RWA, right? It's not how it works. It's all done in the same system, very streamlined. Again, I'll get into that in kind of the next slide. So who's sending it? You as a federal customer, the judiciary is included in that. You'd be sending an RWA work request for that product or service in eReader, saying, hey, GSA, I have a need. Again, you're using our system, our external RWA entry and tracking application. As of October 1, 2019, all federal customers were required to use our system to do so. So again, it's just getting away from kind of that manual process of sending in physical RWAs, on a form, what have you, so we can track everything in one system. So again, difference between a work request and RWA. Work request is that identification of a need for a project or service. It doesn't have to be funded yet. It's just saying, hey, GSA, I have a need. Whereas that RWA, That's the accepted reimbursable work authorization. That's the formal agreement allowing PBS, the Public Building Service, to do work for you as our customer. So with this next slide, I'm just going to kind of walk through the workflow, the work request RWA workflow, if you will. And I just sort of spoke to this a bit, so I'll try not to belabor it too much. But again, what you as a customer, you're doing, you're identifying a need for a product or a service. As soon as you do that, you would want to create an RWA work request in eREDA, right? So you go in the system, you save the work request, it goes into this, what's called a pre-planning status. That means you haven't sent it to us yet. Once you send it to us, the status changes to unassigned. That means GSA has not assigned a project manager to it yet. Within 5 business days, you should receive an automated email that a project manager has been assigned to your work request. At that point, you would work with that project manager to develop whatever requirements are necessary for that project or service. Then that GSA PM would eventually create an estimate in the system and link it to your work request, at which point you would receive another automated email saying, hey, this is the cost of what your project or service will be. At this point, you could enter that remaining funding information on the RWA work request and send for potential acceptance into an RWA. So this workflow kind of walks through all those main statuses, if you will, and kind of the actions that are happening. It's relatively high level. Again, I'm not going to go into so much detail, but just be aware it's on the slides for reference. It's also available on our site, www.gsa.gov/RWA. So I'm going to move on to the next slide. I've already spoken a good amount about REDA or eREDA. That's our RWA entry and tracking application. As Eric mentioned, as I've mentioned, federal customers are required to use eREDA to send all RWA and RWA work request information to PBS. So again, you're identifying a need for a product or service. You wouldn't be sending an email to someone. You'd be going into the system and actually creating that work request in eREDA, right? And so you might be asking, well, why is it REDA/eREDA? What's the difference? It's all one system, right? So the E just stands for external. So we, GSA, we log in through an internal portal to access REDA, the RWA entry and tracking application, whereas you as a customer, you're logging in through an external portal, hence the external RWA entry and tracking application. Again, it's one application. You don't really need to worry about it. It's just a matter of logging in. And if you're a GSA user versus a customer user, you have access to different work requests and RWAs, right? So I, as an administrative user, I would have access to all of them, right? I can see essentially everything. You as a customer, so let's say, for example, you work for the FBI, you would get access to work requests and RWAs associated with Agency Bureau Code 01513. That's just one example, but the same would apply if you worked for the Social Security Administration, Customs and Border Protection, what have you, right? And so what is it, right? Well, it contains all RWA financial information as well as electronic documentation, right? So including everything from the actual RWA 2957 form that gets auto-populated into the system, as well as customer letters, everything from your acceptance letter to your completion letter to your closeout letter. They're all held in the system, as well as any automated communications. I mentioned before, you get an automated communication whenever a project manager has been assigned to your work request. That would be automatically uploaded into the system as well. And then things like, independent government estimates, scopes of work, schedules, what have you, those would all be held in that electronic documentation file for that work request or RWA in eREDA. And importantly, financial information is updated 4 times a day from GSA's financial management system. So you can just be rest assured that the financial data that you're seeing against your RWAs is almost real-time data. Obviously, this financial information You wouldn't be seeing it for work requests, which aren't funded yet, right? But an accepted RWA, that's when we are allowed to start actually doing work against that project or service. And that's where you would see those financials hit against the RWA. So again, just kind of moving forward, another couple things about eRETA. What does it allow you to do, right? So if I were a customer eRETA user, I could go into eRETA, I could search for my work requests, my RWAs, along with their associated estimates. So those overtime utility estimates, as well as summary cost estimates that are associated with RWAs. I can access those. I can export data to Excel, really nifty tool, especially if you're looking to track financials against your RWAs. This is great. You can go into the system, see what RWAs you have, and then export that data to Excel. You're only going to see a certain amount of fields in eRETA itself, simply due to screen size limitations, but you can export that file to Excel where you're going to see a lot more. We go into detail on this a little more in the actual eRETA training if you're curious. Another thing you can do, and I already spoke to this, but identifying new product or service needs via an RWA work request, right? So that's what you're capable of and required to do in eRETA, as well as enter and submit new and amended RWAs. So, once you have the funding on that work request, that's when you would send it for potential acceptance into an RWA. If you had an RWA and let's say work was being done, we realized that costs increased more than we initially thought. So you have to amend the RWA. That you would do in eRETA as well. Even simple things like administrative amendments, if you needed to change your project manager on your RWA, you could do that in the system as well, and are required to do so in the system. And then the last thing, and again, another thing we hit on our tailored kind of eRETA training. eRETA is where you would utilize our digital signature solution to digitally sign all of your RWAs, another requirement as of October 1, 2019. So no more manual signatures, they all must be digitally signed via eRETA's digital signature solution. So that second kind of main bullet there just captures what I already mentioned. Numbers 2, 3, and 4 are required for all federal customers. And if you have any more questions on this, always feel free to go to our main eRETA page. We try to keep it as easy as possible, www.gsa.gov/eRETA. We have a whole page on how to gain access. We have a whole page on training materials. We release kind of a mini user guide, we call it a quick tip each month, and post those on our site. We have very detailed user guides as well, along with past recordings of eRETA sessions. So if you're unable to make any future session, you can always access those previous sessions on that website. So with that, we're going to have one kind of quiz question here, and then I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, John, who will start with the RWA policy part of the presentation. Thanks.
All right, well, thank you, Jeff. We are going to bring up that poll question, and it is about something that Jeff was just talking about. While we bring that up, I do want to reiterate exactly what Jeff said with regard to the available training that we have. For eRETA, all things eRETA, whether you are a beginner or you are an advanced user, and I will catch up to the screen here. True or false, a work request is a formal agreement between PBS and a customer. We'll give everybody a chance to weigh in here. Just true or false. There's not even a third I don't know, I wasn't paying attention option. So what I am seeing on the screen coming in kind of in real time, I think, is trending in the right direction. We have almost 3/4 of our audience, 72% saying false, and false is the correct answer here. A work request is not a formal agreement between PBS and a customer. It just defines a need. It has very few sort of fields and information that we require. It does not require a funding commitment. As Jeff said, you're just saying, hey, GSA, we are going to need X, Y, Z. And we hope that you can help us out with that. And putting in your information as a work request really does help us get ahead of the game when it comes to scoping out requirements, assigning project managers, and things like that. So we are going to take that poll question down. And if you enjoyed the first part of our presentation on e-RETA and you're saying, you know what, I could really go for about 60 to 80 more minutes of that subject in particular, well, you are in luck. Hang tight till the end when we announce the date of our next e-RETA Digest training session. But now we will clear the poll question out of the way, and I am going to turn the remainder of the presentation on over to John Palmer. So John, once that poll question comes down, the floor is yours.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the RWA National Policy portion of today's training. As introduced, I am John Palmer, and I will be addressing the national policy and some of its critical focus areas. Please note, at the bottom of this slide, we have a link that you can use to view or download the RWA national policy from our gsa.gov website. The topics for today's RWA National Policy section are RWA Basics, Laws and Policies Governing RWAs, an RWA Overview, and then some areas of emphasis and focus for you. For RWA Basics, as touched upon earlier today by Jeff, an RWA is a reimbursable work authorization. It is an agreement between GSA and you. Well, we hear someone typing away, so we need to mute your audio, please. So the agreement is between GSA and you, the customer, whereby GSA agrees to provide services outside of normal rent, whether in a federal building or lease space. In return, the customer agrees to reimburse GSA's costs. RWAs are generally utilizing funds from the budget activity BA80, which are your customer funds. The graph simply depicts the flow of funds where the customer is providing GSA money via an RWA. This is accomplished through the use of the GSA Form 2957, or what we commonly refer to as an RWA. Then GSA delivers the customer's needs and requirements through a general contractor, as an example. I invite you to visit the links provided on this slide to learn more about RWAs, our policy, and processes. The RWA program is governed by two components, the appropriations laws and GSA PBS policies. Appropriation laws are passed by Congress and must be followed by all federal entities. There is no wiggle room. GSA and their customers must comply with all appropriations laws. GSA PBS policies have been established to ensure effective and consistent execution of the National RWA program. These are memorialized in the RWA National Policy Manual, which we commonly refer to as the NPM. Occasionally, we will issue guidance or clarifications to extend the understanding of the law or our policy. When we do so, we intend on capturing any changes that are issued in future updates to the NPM. Additionally, any MOUs or memorandums of understanding with specific customers are also included in the NPM. The following laws allow GSA to perform reimbursable work for you, our customers. Essentially, the following laws are either within or outside GSA's jurisdiction, custody, and control. There's not a large test or quiz at the end. We don't expect you to have all the code references committed to memory. Your RWA managers at GSA are an excellent resource and reference for you. Please reach out to them if needed. We have a slide at the end of the training that provides contact information for each RWA manager. What we want you to walk away with today is an understanding of the basics. So focus on the title and the red text that is associated to it for the text description as a key takeaway. So what are the three laws? First, we have within GSA's jurisdiction, custody, and control is the Federal Buildings Fund. Essentially says GSA can do work in properties for our tenants. authorizes GSA to provide services not included in rent on a reimbursable basis, and therefore we receive money from you to do so. The next two laws are outside GSA's jurisdiction, custody, and control. The first is the Economy Act, which gives us the ability to reobligate or contract in the same period as the RWA obligation. These are for requirements outside of our facilities and outside of our jurisdiction, custody, and control. The next one is the construction of buildings. It gives us a little bit more flexibility. It says we can do work in other locations not under GSA's jurisdiction, but it's specific for new construction, repairs, and alterations. But it's not like the Economy Act. It doesn't require us to reobligate the funds in that first year when we receive and accept the RWA. The next law is the Appropriations Law, or use of funds. It is described as the color of money. Simply put, we must use funds for the specific purpose for which they were appropriated and nothing else. Example, if you are given money to buy a car, you cannot then buy a boat. The Recording Act states that we need a clear scope of work. Customers must have documentary evidence to support a valid obligation for their purpose, supported by a clear description of work. The bona fide needs rule means that the customer must have a true need, and therefore, as we use a term, cannot park money with GSA now and then figure out what they want to do with it later and use the monies in a future year. The last two laws that we're going to cover today are the Anti-Deficiency Act and the period of availability. For the Anti-Deficiency Act, it says we need an RWA first. We cannot spend nor obligate money if we do not have the money on an RWA. The period of availability means we have 5 fiscal years to deliver the work. This means we must enter into a contract, execute or deliver the customer's requirements, and liquidate the funds prior to the end of the fifth fiscal year. In a couple of slides, we'll walk through together a graphic that will help you understand how this works. So now for a couple of poll questions.
That's right. We have 2 poll questions that are going to review things that John just went over. So we'll bring that first poll question in here momentarily. I am not. Oh, here it is. All right. I heard from my my behind-the-scenes person. Her internet was going in and out. I got very scared. All right, let's do this poll question here. What constitutes a bona fide need? John just went over this. A, my agency likely has a project need next fiscal year. B, my agency has a project need this fiscal year. C, my agency needs to obligate funds this fiscal year and or they will lose it. D, my agency has an option to the RWA/base contract to be executed next year. I am seeing some results come in behind the scenes here, and I have to say, I think folks are doing a very good job at answering this. I'll give just a couple more seconds for people to consider their answers. And sharing the results with everyone here, it looks as though we had 90% with the correct answer here, which is B, my agency has a project need this fiscal year. All right, as I said, we have a second poll question, so we will clear this poll question out, and we will bring in the second poll question, kind of on the similar topic here. And so this, per appropriations law, how long are funds available for obligation? A little bit of a trickier question here. So A, 5 fiscal years after the RWA is accepted. B, 5 fiscal years after the fund's expiration date of obligational authority. C, until the end of the fiscal year, September 30th of the current fiscal year. D, 1 fiscal year after the RWA is accepted. We'll give everybody a few moments here. All right, so I'm going to end the polling and share the results. And I want to share here that the answer that most people chose is A, 5 fiscal years after the RWA is accepted. I am just your lowly host and not a subject matter expert, so I am going to actually turn this one over to John Palmer. John, is A, 5 fiscal years after the RWA is accepted, the correct answer to this question?
Unfortunately, it is not. So this was not a trick question, but it's intended to focus your thoughts and understanding that it is actually B. It's after the fund's expiration date of obligational authority. So we'll cover a little bit more about that. And when I show you the graphic and understanding availability of funds, we'll have a better understanding of what obligational authority is and what that means for you in terms of how long your funds are good for.
All right, well, thank you, John. We are going to take this poll question out. I will remind folks that as we go through, if you have some questions on what you're hearing, because obviously this subject is a little complicated at first glance, feel free to put it right there in the Q&A, and our subject matter experts will address your question. If it's something we feel that John needs to explain, expand out, or demonstrate, we will ask him. But at this time, we're going to close out the polling app here. And John, I will turn the presentation back over to you.
Okay, so there are 3 types of appropriations: annual, multi-year, and what we call no-year funds. First, let's understand what obligational authority is in simple terms. So this is where I'm going to help clarify for those that did not understand. Obligational authority means that Congress has established how long funds are good for our customers, you, to obligate. For annual funds, the obligational authority is 1 single fiscal year. Therefore, when you receive funds as part of an appropriation, those funds expire on September 30th of the current fiscal year. Funds are only good to satisfy a bona fide need that existed previously and continues to exist in this current fiscal year only. You cannot use these funds for a future need, as I referred to earlier about quote unquote parking funds. Multi-year funds are available for more than 1 fiscal year, depending on how long Congress has made these funds available. A special note, though, is that GSA RWA policy does not allow you to change the scope after the first year the RWA was accepted, even if the funds are still legally available. And the last are the no-year funds, are available until expended. They never expire. These funds can satisfy a need looking forward or backward in time. The same RWA policy, though, applies where you cannot change the scope on your RWA after the first year in which it was accepted, even if the funds are still legally available. Note, for time-limited funds, such as annual funds and multi-year funds, PBS must enter into contracts, execute the work, and liquidate the obligations within 5 years after the obligational authority of funds is expired. So for those of you who are still saying, what is this obligational authority of funds and how does it apply? We're going to go to the next slide, and it's a graphic, and I'll walk you through it. And hopefully by the end of the slide, you'll have a better understanding. So the purpose of this slide is to show you how the period of availability works. How long is my RWA good for, you may ask. This example is, again, for annual funds. It depicts that we are currently in fiscal year 2021. First, I would like to draw your attention to a couple of important deadlines to be familiar with that are highlighted in red bubbles. At the bottom of the FY21 block, the deadline for new RWAs this fiscal year would be September 7th, which gives us collectively time to process and obtain signatures prior to the end of the fiscal year. This day happens to fall after Labor Day. As we did in FY20, GSA gave customers a little bit more time to submit RWAs since the use of e-RETA has improved our communication and processing of work requests and RWAs between the two of us, GSA and the customer. The second deadline, also highlighted in red, is the end of the fiscal year, where GSA cannot accept brand new RWAs after September 30th, using funds from FY21. This is referred to as the expiration date of obligational authority, which is also highlighted in the yellow callout. To help reinforce this, what obligational authority means, again, as I've covered here and in the previous slides, is that Congress has established how long the funds they've given you are good for. In this example, annual funds are good for our customers for 1 year. The act of providing the funds via an RWA on a GSA Form 2957 meets your requirements to obligate funds. Now, to show you how the period of availability works, we have an example. And the example is where GSA accepts an RWA for a courtroom renovation on December 10th. That's the blue box still under the FY21 section. Remember, GSA must enter into contracts and liquidate obligations within 5 years after the expiration of our customer's obligational authority granted to them by Congress. So if we've accepted an RWA in FY21, excuse me, we would begin counting 5 fiscal years after this one. So it would be FY22, FY23, and so on to FY26. It is important to know that we must have all obligations. They need to be liquidated, invoices received, and paid out prior to September 30th, 2026, which is the end of that 5th year. This is when the appropriation is closed and the monies are no longer available for any use. And that's an important thing for us to all remember. So next, RWAs are classified as recurring or non-recurring. Recurring RWAs are used when costs of services are not separately invoiced and cannot be readily identified from our standard operating costs. Recurring RWAs cannot extend past the current fiscal year and will default to a September 30th completion date unless you specify an earlier date in the year. Non-recurring RWAs are used when there is a separate invoice for goods or services provided. There are 2 types of services, severable and non-severable. The 2 types are set up in this table to give you a contrast between the 2. So let's walk through both types of services. First, we have severable. Severable services are continuing in nature. You receive value as the service is rendered, and services with annual appropriations must be contractually obligated when the services are rendered. RWAs must be fully obligated in the fiscal year they are accepted in order for the period of performance to extend in the next fiscal year. Key thing to remember. Some examples are overtime utilities, preventative maintenance, etc. This requires the use of the overtime utility estimate tool, and it applies to all severable RWAs. Unfortunately, it's labeled the overtime utility estimate tool because that's where it started, but it does apply to all severable RWAs, and that's the tool you use, not the SCE. To contrast, non-severable are for services or work that results in a single outcome, a product or a report. And you receive value only when the entire service is performed, not in partial, but the entire service. GSA can utilize funds to contract and liquidate for 5 years after the obligation year, except F types, which close out each fiscal year. Some examples are new initial space build-outs, repair and alterations, designs, or studies. And this requires you to use the summary cost estimate, the SCE, which is found in RETA or eRETA. This RWA type overview slide is only for an educational FYI for you. It's something you only need to be familiar with. More detailed information is available in our National Policy Manual, as well as in other trainings if you're interested. The most important connection for you today for this slide is the Google RWA acceptance form that is filled out by GSA. It's important for you as the customer to have a discussion with your GSA project manager or any team or folks filling out the Google acceptance form at GSA to ensure that they have the most up-to-date information from you so they can answer the questions in the form accurately. Then the appropriate path to the RWA type will be determined as a result. So I'm not going to walk through in detail the different types of RWAs in terms of the discussion today, but this is just to show you that how it breaks down in the tree for recurring, non-recurring, servable, non-servable, etc. So for requirements development and scopes of work, the GSA PM and teams should discuss and share information with you and any other subject matter experts or supporting groups that are working with the project team. The first important component is the needs assessment interview, where a GSA PM will meet with the customer to gather initial project requirements and confirm the understanding of DIDs, design intent drawings, or program of requirements, PORs, or design guide components if the customer has provided them. Once the PM has digested all of this information, they would then work with you jointly to develop a specific and discrete scope of work. They would also discuss the schedule and budget and review areas for compliance such as fiscal law, the Architectural Barriers Act accessibility standards, commonly referred to as ABAS, or historic preservation and P100 for a few examples. Remember, we learned earlier today that according to the Recording Act, the customer needs to establish a clear scope of work. So let's walk through some of the components that are required for the scope of work. We need for you to provide us a purpose and objective of the outcome of services that you're requesting. For example, you have a new office space, climate-controlled server room, or upgraded finishes for a new leader or new judge in a chambers or a courtroom. Identify the elements and specifics of how the project outcome will be achieved. You need us to provide demo, design, construction, an air handling unit, remove, replace carpet, etc. The geographic location of the service to include the address, building number, floor, and room number. The required delivery timeframe that you're looking for us to provide this to meet your needs, and then also the total square footage. Please note, at the bottom of this slide, a scope of work must be provided in sufficient detail to permit us and you to provide for a contract to be awarded. You cannot use an RWA for scope that is not defined in that RWA. So unfortunately, if we don't define it and we don't include it, then it will require a new scope and thus a new RWA. Scopes of work on an existing RWA are locked at the end of the fiscal year in which the RWA is accepted, regardless of funding type. That's a key note for everyone. Full funding versus incremental funding. Full funding is required for non-servable services and must be sufficient to accomplish the entirety of the requested work, even if the work is scheduled to occur over multiple fiscal years, such as in phasing, or it just takes that long to execute the work. If a project is non-servable, the customer must fund the entire scope of work with funds available for obligation at the time the customer submits the RWA for acceptance. Incremental funding is prohibited. We cannot fund a non-servable service or project over a period of time. Must have all at once. Lease RWA funding for above TI allowance. If the TI, tenant improvement, exceeds the customer TI allowance, the RWA to pay for the above TI must cite currently available funds and be received and accepted by GSA no later than the date of lease award. Yes, it's true, RWAs can be accepted as soon as the project is identified, scoped, and estimated, but the lease award cannot be made without the RWA funding. Antecedent liabilities. These are the events that cause price increases in the original scope of work. No scope increases, only price or cost increase. And an antecedent liability must be an amendment to the existing RWA. No new or other RWAs can cover antecedent liabilities. Some examples include when you cover differing site conditions, Cost increase to move ductwork that may not have been identified on drawings. Cost increases for fire or life safety requirements, inadvertently left out in planning. Unforeseen increases in material labor costs. Contract proposal exceeds estimates but still within the fair and reasonable amount, or any additional GSA direct charges that may occur as a result of providing services to you. Continuation of antecedent liability. You must provide funds that were available when the original RWA was submitted and accepted. The only exception is if you don't have funds any longer available, you must meet both conditions that are identified below. You can utilize current year funding, but it can be used only if you provide a statement of further written assurance, which must be signed and provided by you, stating that you no longer have funds available from the original year. And we've provided an example here, as if an RWA was funded in FY19 with annual funds to build out a courtroom. Project was unfortunately underestimated, resulting in antecedent liability in FY21, our current fiscal year. The RWA should be amended with FY19 funds. If FY19 funds are not available, then you can provide current year funds as long as you provide the statement of further written assurance along with it. And for some customers, they have different internal policies, and we will assist in making sure that we follow those as well. Amendments. Amendments to an RWA are acceptable for changes or additions to the scope of work in the same fiscal year when the original RWA was accepted. If you're doing a reduction in scope of requirements or scope of work, then amendments are acceptable at any time. Amendments for several services using funds available at the time of services were provided, or within scope cost increases attributed to the antecedent liability that I just covered. Amendments, again, are not acceptable for out-of-scope changes. Also include scope changes after the initial year for which we accepted the RWA. If you're trying to exercise contract options, it must be funded with current year funds. So it must be a new RWA. Additions or new scope after the end of the fiscal year, the RWA was accepted. We've covered that a couple of times, just reiterating that as an important factor. And if you're making changes to the period of performance of several RWAs after the initial year of acceptance, even if it was provided with no year funds. So now we have a couple poll questions.
That is true. I believe we have one poll question for this section. Now I'm going to bring that one on the screen. This is a yes or no question, and that is, can the scope of work on an RWA be changed after the first fiscal year in which it was accepted? I do know that when John was explaining this out, there was a little aside in his voice that said, this is something you're going to want to know. It was a tease for this poll question. And give everybody a chance to weigh in here. It's simply yes or no. A couple more seconds as I see the numbers ticking up here. All right, we're going to lock it in there and share the results with everybody. That we have about 80% of the folks here had the right answer. No, scope of work on an RWA cannot be changed after the first fiscal year in which it was accepted. So thank you, and good job paying attention to that. If you are in the 20% and you have a follow-up question, please do throw it into the Q&A, and one of our experts here will either address your question, or we can even bring it back out to John to explain a little bit more. But the answer to that one was no. All right, we have just a little bit more slides to go today, I think, John. So I believe you have just a little bit more. I'm going to turn it on back over to you here.
Absolutely. I'm just going to say a couple of things in regards to the scope of work changing after the first fiscal year in which it was accepted. I want folks to remember that you cannot add scope. And so when we refer to essentially changing of scope, that's what most folks refer to. So for those of you that answered yes, the 20%, you might have been thinking this was a trick question. Yes, indeed, you can change the scope of work, but only to reduce the scope of work. So you cannot add anything new. You can't put new scope on your RWA. Oh, I forgot my boss wants this room to be renovated with this type of furniture or this type of setup. If it's a scope change and you need to add it, then it has to be on a new RWA. Oh, too fast with my fingers. So in regards to resources and questions, there's a lot of available resources for you if you have questions. There's a ton of eRETA training and resources available at www.gsa.gov/eRETA. Additionally, there's some general RWA information available at www.gsa.gov/RWA. If you have an eRETA system question, you need access, you can't get in, you're having trouble navigating, then there's eRETA at gsa.gov. If you have a general RWA question, please forward it to askrwa@gsa.gov. And obviously, if you have a specific question on an RWA project or service within a particular region, please contact the regional RWA manager, and we'll show you a map here shortly, which gives you all the contact information. Or feel free to look in eRETA and identify the GSA project manager's email and reach out to them if it's at the initial stages. If you're already in the works, then you most likely have a phone number or better contact information for your project manager. So here's the contact information for the RWA managers across the nation for GSA, broken out by region, and the map covers the states that they are responsible for. And each of these are current RWA managers. That includes their email and their direct phone number. So if you need to reach out to them, feel free to do so. It's an opportunity for some questions. I ask that you don't rush off if you don't have any questions, because we do have a couple of final poll questions for you that we'd like to capture before you depart from us. So I would ask.
Yeah, thanks, John. So what we're going to do, I think, please continue to pop your questions into the Q&A. Let's give folks a chance to put some questions into the Q&A and give our subject matter experts the chance to review and either respond or we can pull some out. And in the interim, why don't we go ahead and get those poll questions up while we're doing that, just to see what, give people some time to do that. I do see some folks have raised their hand. Again, if you do have a question for John or for Jeff, throw it into the Q&A. That's the best way to bring it to our attention. The first poll question that we have here is, how would you rate this training? This is the first of this round of our external RWA policy training. So we're looking for ways to improve this, because we are going to be doing this at least one more time this spring. I'll give everybody just a chance. Did you find it very helpful, helpful, somewhat helpful, marginally helpful, or not helpful at all? And I'll give everyone a few more seconds to register their opinion. Going once, going twice. All right. And so I do want to thank everyone who rang in on that. Most people found it either helpful or very helpful, and that is, of course, helpful to us in terms of moving forward. So thank you very much. And then we have a second question that we want to bring in, because like I said, we are going to refine and have an encore performance of this, perhaps for you, perhaps for your colleagues. And we just want to know how to best refine this moving forward. So we will bring that second poll question in here. You see it up on your screen. And again, if you can't see it up on your screen and you like one of these answers, just throw it into the chat. And that is, which topics still need more explanation? And you can choose multiple. You can choose work requests and RWA workflow, eRETA and RETA. You can have laws and policy governing RWAs. You can have types of appropriations, types of RWAs. I'll tell you what, I've been here several years. I could always use a refresher myself on types of RWAs. We have national policy areas of emphasis for full funding, amendments, lease award, etc. And then none. You know, we did good on that last one, but it looks like we have some folks ringing in with with some helpful suggestions. So I do appreciate that. Give everyone a moment or two just to register your opinion. And as you can see on the screen, types of RWAs was the quote winner here, but we do have quite a good spread. Folks want to understand better the work request and RWA workflow, RETA and e-RETA process, and then we have some others as well. So first, thank you for weighing in with your opinion on that. We are going to take and maybe amend future presentations to kind of areas of emphasis here. But those of you who responded to A and B, work request, RWA workflow, and RETA/e-RETA, pay attention in about 45 to 90 seconds, and I can hook you up with some more information on that topic. So we are going to remove this poll question. I don't believe, unless I'm mistaken, we have any questions to pull out for further explanation. But I will remind everyone that as long as you hear the sound of my voice, you can pop your questions into the Q&A. Our subject matter experts will address them as they can. And if we run out of time, what we are going to do is we will turn things around into a formal FAQ document. And what we are going to do is, what we are going to do is make that available to you after the fact. I do have a note here that there is a popular question about where can you get the slides. All registered participants, one, should have received a copy prior to this session. If you didn't, you're probably asking that question. No worries. You will receive a copy after the presentation as well. And we also, I believe, post these online at www.gsa.gov/CES tagged to the presentation itself. So there are a couple of different ways. And honestly, if you want to make my coworkers work for their money today, you can also throw your name into the chat and say, hey, can you hook me up with one of the with a copy of the slides? And someone will email you a copy right out. So as we wind up, one, I want to thank everybody for joining us today. And I want to do a couple of quick shout out promotions here. You can see on our screen, this was the RWA policy highlights. And we are having a second encore presentation of this, and that is on Tuesday, March 9th. And if you are one of those folks who needs a little bit more of information, or you are looking to have some more on types of RWAs, or you answered this or that, well, you can register now for that March 9th session. You can come back, and we will give an encore and more tailored version of this presentation. So I do want to take a moment, one, to thank Jeff and John for their efforts today. I want to thank all of our participants who showed up. And if you asked a question, if you raise your hand, thank you for joining us today. We do appreciate it, and we appreciate your feedback, and also the Client Enrichment Series team working hard behind the scenes. And not only that, you can see on your screen right now, we are near the end of our slide deck, and we have a wonderful slate of upcoming CES sessions. If you are one of those people who answered A or B just now, I want more information about RETA and e-RETA. I need more information about the work request RWA workflow process. I want to see your virtual presence Tuesday, February 9th. That is approximately a month from today, where we have our e-RETA Digest presentation. Reimbursable team comes back and we go over beginner and advanced e-RETA information. So whether you're a data entry user or read-only user, you don't have e-RETA user access yet, you will want to attend that. We review the ins and the outs of using e-RETA. We also go over a little bit of the work request and RWA process. We also have on here coming up on Thursday, January 21st is our next regularly scheduled CES session, and that is to shape your workplace with activity-based planning. This is a presentation coming out of our Total Workplace group. This is the first time that we're doing this specific presentation. Would encourage everyone who has an interest in workplace planning to definitely show up for that one. And since we're on the topic of planning, occupancy planning and solutions, Thursday, February 18th, this is going to be a really interesting presentation. I think many folks are aware of the PBS project life cycle and the concept of occupancy planning, but perhaps you didn't know that GSA PBS has lots of innovative solutions to help our customers overcome hurdles, whether it's financial, whether it is fit out, whether it is planning based, so that we can help you better plan for occupancies where you think you might have a stumbling block. And then once again, you see here we have encore presentation of this performance Tuesday, March 9th. So come on back here, Jeff, here, John, and I think here myself. I'm not sure if I'm on tap for that one, but I'll sign up for it now. At the bottom of your screen there are two very important links I want to draw your attention to. It's no secret that we are in business, but not as normal. I am coming to you live from my telework bunker in the suburban Washington, D.C. area. Have not been into GSA Central office in quite some time, and I imagine many of you are in the same boat. GSA has an abundance of COVID-19 resources for our customers, everything from frequently asked questions to return to workplace facility manuals, policies, and information. And I want to draw your attention to the URLs up on your screen. And in fact, if you go to our homepage, www.gsa.gov, you will find links directly from there to our Return to Facilities portal, as well as our COVID FAQ page. And at the bottom of our page there, I teased this at the beginning, if you want to watch more than 30 CES sessions on your own 24/7 from the comfort of any device that you have, please click and bookmark our YouTube channel. You can go back in the archives and you can watch this, you can watch other presentations at your leisure, and we encourage you to do so. Leave us a comment, hit us with a like. That would go a long way. So as we wrap up here, one more time, I want to thank everybody for joining us today and remind everybody that the goal of the Client Enrichment Series is to engage our audience in workplace topics that contribute to your mission success and to the effective management of your real estate and workplace programs. Once again, from my telework bunker in suburban Washington, D.C., on behalf of the CES and RWA teams, thank you very much for joining us today and have a wonderful afternoon.